Today, India is actively building invisible infrastructure.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Right. Because, we usually look for steel and concrete or
Yeah.
cranes in the sky to measure progress.
Oh, totally. The physical stuff.
Exactly. But the most massive upgrades happening right now, they aren't made of physical materials at all. I mean, they're written in legal code, digital databases, and regulatory frameworks. We are talking about upgrading the operating system of an entire nation.
And just like any massive software update, it is full of bugs.
Oh, yeah.
Like serious legacy code issues. There is this intense friction between the old way of doing things and the new reality. And it's happening across every sector simultaneously.
Which is exactly what we are mapping out today. So welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
If you are listening to this, you are likely, prepping for a major career milestone, maybe an exam, or trying to stay ahead of the curve in your industry. Or maybe you just have an intense curiosity about how the systems around you actually work.
Which is exactly who this is for.
Right. Consider this your masterclass in current affairs. We are looking at a massive stack of sources from today, May 1st, 2026. And our mission is to connect the dots across polity, the economy, internal security, and international relations.
Yeah, because when you look at these sources collectively, ranging from high court rulings on fundamental rights to macroeconomic data and geopolitical shifts, you stop seeing isolated daily news items.
You see the big picture.
Exactly. You start to see the underlying mechanics of how a state actually functions
Yeah.
and, how it adapts to stress.
So let's get right into those mechanics, starting with the absolute bedrock of the republic, which is the electoral process.
Right.
Right now, Maharashtra is struggling with this massive enfranchisement bottleneck. The state's chief electoral officer is preparing for a special intensive revision of the voter list.
A huge undertaking.
Well, massive. But to pass scrutiny, booth-level officers have to trace every single current voter's name back to a legacy electoral roll from 2002.
It is a complete logistical nightmare. I mean, to put it in perspective, urban areas like Mumbai Suburban, Pune, and Thane, they are lagging at less than 50% completion.
Wow. Less than half.
Yeah, less than half. The Election Commission is running into what they call logical discrepancies.
Okay, what does that actually mean in practice?
Well, a logical discrepancy could be something as simple as, a parent's name being spelled with an extra vowel today compared to how it was scribbled down 24 years ago.
Wait, really?
Yeah, and because of that tiny clerical mismatch, a citizen could theoretically lose their right to vote.
Man, it's like trying to navigate a modern, rapidly expanding smart city using a vintage hand-drawn map where half the streets have been renamed or just paved over.
That is exactly what it's like.
You were just bound to get lost. So, to fix this, the CEO has proposed a self-mapping online option. It's similar to the digital census. Voters just, log in and link their current identity to the old database themselves.
Which is a perfect example of deploying a digital patch to fix a deeply analog, bureaucratic problem.
Right.
But beneath the technology, it exposes a real vulnerability. Your most fundamental democratic right, the franchise, is currently hanging by the thread of a 2-decade-old piece of paper.
Yeah, they're essentially crowdsourcing the administrative labor to the citizens to ensure they aren't accidentally disenfranchised.
Exactly. It's a heavy burden to put on the voter.
And while we are on the topic of fundamental rights and, the friction they cause, the courts are heavily involved in defining the boundaries of political speech today.
Oh, absolutely. The judiciary is super active right now.
Yeah, we have two massive rulings. First, the Allahabad High Court threw out a plea that wanted a criminal case filed against Rahul Gandhi.
Right, over his specific wording.
Yeah, he had made a public statement saying his fight was with the Indian state, and a petitioner tried to claim this was a call for, anti-national rebellion.
And the court really didn't mince words here. They ruled that in a parliamentary democracy, criticizing government policy is an absolute necessity.
Which makes sense.
Right. They explicitly defined the word fight in the context of an elected opposition leader. They said it signifies intense ideological advocacy and electoral opposition.
It doesn't mean physical combat.
Exactly. It does not mean armed insurrection. The judiciary is drawing a very clear line to protect the space for political dissent.
It really feels like the courts are actively trying to build a firebreak between intense political rivalry and actual criminal liability.
That's a great way to look at it.
Because right alongside that, the Supreme Court just granted anticipatory bail to Congress leader Paul Ankara in a defamation case involving the Assam chief minister's wife.
And the Supreme Court's reasoning there was deeply foundational. They explicitly invoked Article 21 of the Constitution, which, guarantees personal liberty.
Right.
The court noted that personal liberty cannot be lightly jeopardized just because a case has political overtones.
Basically saying, don't use the police to settle political scores.
Exactly. They are sending a strong signal that routine custodial interrogation shouldn't be used as a tool for political retribution. The criminal justice process just has to maintain its objectivity.
Okay, so we see the judiciary acting as this critical shock absorber for the democracy, right?
Yeah.
Protecting speech and liberty.
Absolutely.
But the courts themselves are undergoing their own massive structural upgrade. The Chief Justice of India just declared Sikkim as the very first state with a completely paperless judiciary.
Which changes the entire physical reality of seeking justice.
How so?
Well, the CJI pointed out that the legal landscape is moving to a digital ecosystem. Before this, a litigant in a remote part of Sikkim might have to, measure their journey to a courtroom in days of travel across the Himalayas.
Just to file some paperwork.
Just to file a physical piece of paper. A digital platform completely dismantles that geographical constraint.
Okay, but let me challenge that premise for a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
If the courts are completely bogged down acting as referees for all this endless political friction, does making them paperless actually speed up the delivery of justice? Or are we just turning a massive, dusty room of pending paper files into a massive, invisible server of pending PDF files?
That is a very fair point. Digitizing the inputs does not automatically digitize the cognitive work of a judge.
Right.
You are absolutely right that a digital backlog is still a backlog. But what the paperless system does is optimize the flow of information. It removes the friction of entry and the delays of physically moving files from desk to desk.
So getting in the door is faster.
Right. Access to the court becomes instantaneous. But the human element of adjudication, weighing the facts, interpreting the law, that still dictates the ultimate pace of justice.
Makes sense. So we just saw the courts trying to restrain state overreach when it comes to personal liberty. But when you look at the enforcement side of the state, they're actively expanding their reach.
Oh, definitely. Especially with financial crimes.
Yeah, particularly when tracing illegal wealth. The Enforcement Directorate just held its 70th Foundation Day, and they announced that over the last decade, their asset attachments have skyrocketed 23-fold.
That's a massive jump.
To over 1,19,000 crore rupees.
Yeah, and at that event, Additional Solicitor General S.V. Raju gave a very detailed breakdown of how the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, or PMLA, actually functions.
Right, the mechanics of it.
Exactly. He focused on a concept known in legal circles as the umbilical cord.
The umbilical cord, okay.
Under the PMLA, money laundering is considered a standalone offense. However, it relies entirely on the existence of the proceeds of crime. And those proceeds must be generated from an original underlying crime, which they call the predicate offense.
Wait, this is where the legal logic gets incredibly tangled for me.
It is tricky.
Let me unpack this umbilical cord idea. If a trial court completely acquits someone of that original predicate offense, like the foundation of the house falls down, how can the ED argue that the money laundering charge should still survive?
It's a great question.
I mean, it's like arresting someone for receiving stolen goods. But the court proves that no robbery ever took place. How do you keep the goods?
Well, the ED's perspective, as outlined by the ASG, is highly aggressive. Their argument is that a predicate offense might fail in court for a variety of procedural reasons.
Like what?
Maybe a lack of evidence at a pretrial stage, or a key witness recanting their testimony. But if the ED's separate investigation can independently trace a massive, unexplained flow of illicit cash, the proceeds of crime, they believe the laundering proceedings shouldn't automatically collapse.
Just because the local police couldn't prove the original theft.
Exactly. And the Minister of State for Finance backed this up, likening financial crime to a cancer that requires an aggressive, victim-centric approach to recover the funds.
We're seeing that same zero-tolerance aggression of physical security, too.
Oh, with the drug busts.
Yeah. The Narcotics Control Bureau just executed Operation White Strike. They took down this transnational drug syndicate, seizing 349 kilograms of high-grade cocaine worth nearly 1,750 crore rupees in the Kalamboli-Bhiwandi corridor. And they found the cocaine meticulously hidden inside the lining of cricket pads and gloves.
Which really highlights the sophisticated logistics of modern syndicates. I mean, they aren't just smuggling in dark alleys anymore.
No, not at all.
They are using standard industrial corridors and legitimate warehousing infrastructure to move contraband. The NCB tracked this operation bottom up, starting from street-level distributors all the way to the top of the network.
Which is a huge operational shift.
It is. It shows a significant upgrade in their intelligence gathering capability.
But if the executive branch, through agencies like the ED and the NCB, is wielding this much sweeping power to seize thousands of crores and dismantle syndicates, there has to be a counterweight, right?
You need checks and balances.
Exactly. You need someone auditing the ledger.
Yeah.
That brings us to the Reconstitution of the Parliamentary Committees. The Lok Sabha Speaker just appointed Congress's K.C. Venugopal as the chairperson of the Public Accounts Committee.
Right, the PAC. The PAC is the ultimate legislative auditor.
What's their main role?
In a system where the executive is forcefully collecting revenues, attaching assets, and spending massive budgets, the legislature must ensure that every single rupee is accounted for.
And it's usually led by the opposition, right?
By tradition, yes. The PAPEC is chaired by a member of the opposition. It ensures that the government's financial homework is graded by its harshest critics.
Which is a fundamental mechanism of institutional accountability.
Exactly.
So let's shift our focus from how the state tracks illicit wealth to how it manages the nation's legitimate wealth, because the macroeconomic data coming out today is striking.
The GST numbers.
Yeah. April saw a record gross GST collection of 2.43 lakh crore rupees.
That's a huge milestone. But what you really need to look at there is the internal composition of that number.
Okay, break that down for me.
It wasn't just uniform growth across the board. The record was heavily driven by a 25.8% surge in import-led revenues.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That growth rate significantly outpaced the taxes collected on domestic transactions. It indicates that domestic consumer demand is incredibly strong. So strong, in fact, that it is pulling in massive amounts of foreign goods to satisfy it.
And speaking of foreign inflows, the data on remittances is really fascinating. We always assume that geopolitical volatility, like the tensions in the Middle East, will immediately choke off the money that Indians working abroad send home.
Right, that's the common assumption.
But RBI Deputy Governor Poonam Gupta presented data showing our remittances are actually highly stable. Interestingly, the share of remittances coming from the Gulf region has dropped from 47% to 38% over the last few years.
It functions exactly like a well-diversified stock portfolio.
How do you mean?
Well, the Indian diaspora isn't just concentrated in Gulf construction anymore. They are diversifying globally into sectors like IT in North America, healthcare in Europe, and hospitality in Southeast Asia.
Oh, I see.
Because the workforce is spread across different global economic cycles, if one region takes a cyclical hit, the overall remittance pool remains a stable, reliable anchor for India's balance of payments.
Here is where I see a massive contradiction, though.
Okay, let's hear it.
If our macroeconomy is booming with record GST and resilient remittances, why is the RBI acting like a doomsday prepper with our gold reserves?
The repatriation.
Yeah. According to the sources, the RBI repatriated 168 metric tons of gold back to physical vaults in India in the 2025-26 period.
It is a direct response to the weaponization of global finance.
Now, what does that mean practically?
Well, when the U.S. and its allies froze Russia's dollar-denominated foreign exchange reserves at the start of the Ukraine conflict, every central bank in the world took notes.
I bet.
The realization was that sovereign wealth held in foreign jurisdictions is only truly yours until a diplomatic dispute arises.
It's essentially like moving your company's most critical files off a public cloud server and storing them on an encrypted hard drive sitting on your physical desk.
Yeah.
Just because you suddenly realized the cloud provider can lock your account with a single keystroke.
That is the exact mechanism of risk mitigation at play here. India is deliberately pulling its assets inward. It is a strategy of domestic storage to ensure that no matter what happens with foreign sanctions or global diplomatic fallout, the core sovereign wealth is physically insulated behind national borders.
Contrast that defensive external posture with how aggressively India is forcing modernization internally.
Like in the corporate sector.
Exactly. Look at the regulatory battle happening right now. A proxy advisory firm called InGovern is lobbying the RBI to reject Tata Sons' request to deregister as a core investment company.
Right, the Tata Sons debate.
Tata Sons essentially paid off 20,000 crore rupees in standalone debt so they could argue, hey, we don't hold public funds anymore, so we shouldn't be subject to the strict scale-based regulatory framework, because that framework would force them into a mandatory IPO.
This is a profound test of the RBI's willingness to enforce corporate governance on legacy conglomerates.
Really, why is it such a big test?
Because Tata's argument is based on their direct, standalone balance sheet. But in govern is pointing to the look-through loop.
Let's break down that look-through concept for a second. It's basically like a Russian nesting doll of corporate ownership, right?
That's a perfect analogy.
Tata Sons claims they are a private shell. But if you open that shell, you see they are owned by other Tata Group companies like Tata Motors or Tata Steel.
Right.
And if you open those shells, you find millions of everyday retail investors.
Exactly. Because those subsidiary entities rely heavily on public debt and equity, everyday public shareholders are indirectly funding Tata Sons.
So they are holding public money, just indirectly.
Right. By enforcing this scale-based regulatory framework, the RBI would compel Tata Sons to list on the stock exchanges. And an IPO forces radical transparency.
It opens the books.
Completely. It subjects the company to quarterly disclosures, independent audits, and public scrutiny over how they allocate capital. The regulatory push here is that systemic size demands systemic transparency, regardless of a company's historical prestige.
And we are seeing that same drive for efficiency in our fiscal infrastructure, too.
Oh, the new toll system.
Yeah. India's first completely barrierless multi-lane free-flow toll system, or MLFF, just went live at Gujarat's Triasi Plaza on National Highway 48.
That's a huge upgrade.
There are no boom barriers, no toll booths to pull up to. It uses high-speed automatic number plate recognition cameras and radio frequency identification to deduct the toll while you maintain highway speeds.
And, the regulatory foresight required to make that happen is massive.
How so?
You couldn't build an MLFF system without first spending years mandating high-security registration plates and enforcing the one vehicle, one FASTag rule to clean up the digital database.
Right, getting the data clean first.
Exactly. The result is a significant drop in highway congestion, better fuel efficiency, and a real reduction in localized carbon emissions from idling trucks. Speaking of which, there's also the MCD exploring green road building tech like ReduPave with the CRI.
Which naturally bridges us into the massive, unavoidable collision between domestic infrastructure development and environmental realities.
They almost always clash eventually.
Let's look at the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. There is an incredibly intense debate over the 81,000 crore rupee Great Nicobar mega project.
This one is very polarized.
Very. We have Rahul Gandhi explicitly calling it a scam, arguing it threatens millions of trees and the heritage of indigenous tribes.
Right.
On the flip side, the government has released a detailed fact sheet fiercely defending the project.
To understand the stakes, you really have to look at both arguments objectively. The government's core defense is strategic geography.
The military angle.
Yeah. They argue the project is necessary to establish a critical maritime and defense presence in the Indo-Pacific region. To counter the environmental and tribal concerns, their fact sheet claims there will be absolutely no relocation of the Shompen or Nicobarese tribes.
And what about the land itself?
They state that by re-notifying certain lands, the project actually results in a net addition of 3.9 square kilometers to the tribal reserve area, backed by 42 specific environmental safeguards.
Okay, but I have to push back on the fundamental premise here.
Sure.
We constantly hear these issues framed as a zero-sum game of development versus the environment. But can a massive strategic military port and transshipment terminal truly coexist with an untouched, incredibly fragile island biosphere?
It's a tough balance.
Look at the push happening right now to officially notify heat waves as state-specific disasters under the National Disaster Management Authority. Ignoring the environment doesn't just hurt trees, it actively destroys economic development.
The heat wave notification push proves your point perfectly. Currently, heat waves only trigger temporary health advisories.
Just a warning to stay inside.
Exactly. But if they are officially notified as disasters, it fundamentally changes the bureaucratic response. It unlocks the state disaster response funds.
So real money gets deployed.
Yes. That money can be used for structural mitigation, mandating cool roofs on factories, establishing dedicated heat clinics, and fundamentally altering labor laws so construction workers aren't outside at 2 p.m.
Wow.
It is an acknowledgement that ecological extremes are now systemic economic threats. You cannot build long-term infrastructure if the environment around it is collapsing.
And that reality requires an incredible amount of policy calibration, which brings us to our final arena, international diplomacy and trade.
Right, the external links.
We just saw India sign a massive free trade agreement with New Zealand. But it isn't just about lowering tariffs on agricultural goods. It features a binding $20 billion foreign direct investment commitment.
That FTA represents a massive pivot in India's geoeconomic strategy.
A pivot away from what?
Well, instead of just trading finished goods, India is using trade agreements to force its way into deeper Indo-Pacific value chains. By securing guaranteed FDI, India is building a defensive economic posture,
Ensuring the money stays here.
ensuring that foreign capital is anchored in domestic manufacturing, creating jobs rather than just importing products.
But the strategy of regional integration is incredibly fragile, as we can see with our immediate neighbors. Delhi and Dhaka are currently trying to resume full-scale visa operations.
The Bangladesh situation.
Yeah. Right now, under the new Tariq Rahman government in Bangladesh, visas are operating at just 15 to 20% capacity, strictly limited to medical and family emergencies.
Normalizing those visa operations is the absolute prerequisite for any kind of regional stability.
Right, you need people to be able to move.
You cannot maintain cross-border energy grids or trade corridors if business leaders and citizens can't physically travel. India is working to reset diplomatic relations after the severe strain caused by the ouster of Sheikh Hasina.
Yet, while the diplomats are trying to smooth things over, local politics is throwing a wrench in the gears.
The recent comments?
Yes. And Bangladesh just formally protested comments made by Assam Chief Minister Himanta Biswa Sarma, who was talking about deporting infiltrators.
And Dhaka reacted strongly to that.
Very strongly. They called the remarks disparaging. And the friction was bad enough that Delhi officially had to step in and clarify that the chief minister's views do not represent the central government's foreign policy.
It perfectly illustrates the volatility of modern statecraft. A piece of local political rhetoric designed entirely to mobilize a domestic electoral base in a border state can instantly detonate an international diplomatic crisis.
It's all connected.
A nation's foreign policy is only as stable as its internal political discipline.
Let's pull all these threads together. We started with the sheer logistical weight of a 2002 electoral roll and the geographical barriers falling in Sikkim's paperless courts.
Right.
We saw the judiciary defining the limits of political speech, while the executive branch aggressively traces the umbilical cord of illicit wealth overseen by legislative auditors in the past act.
The checks and balances.
Exactly. We track the macro engine surging import GST and diversified remittances while watching the RBI lock our gold in domestic vaults and force corporate giants like Tata toward transparency. And finally, we saw how strategic megaprojects, environmental disasters, and local political rhetoric all collide on the international stage.
The overarching lesson here is that you cannot analyze a nation's trajectory in isolated silos.
No, you really can't.
The legal definition of money laundering dictates corporate compliance. A digital upgrade in a Himalayan courtroom impacts a citizen's fundamental liberty. A local politician's speech halts international visa processing. The invisible infrastructure is entirely interconnected.
So after dissecting all of this, what is the underlying insight for the listener trying to understand where we are actually heading?
Here is the final thought to leave you with. Throughout these sources, we've seen India aggressively building frictionless open systems.
Like the barrier-free highways and paperless courts.
Exactly. Self-mapping voter databases, deep integration into global supply chains through new trade agreements. But at the exact same moment, the state is pulling its physical gold inward, aggressively seizing assets, and fortifying its maritime borders.
So it's opening up and locking down at the same time.
Precisely. The question you have to ponder is this. In an increasingly fragmented global order, can a state successfully operate a wide-open, high-speed digital economy while simultaneously pulling its core strategic assets behind a towering fortress wall?
It is the ultimate tightrope walk between total connectivity and absolute sovereignty. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems around you, look for the invisible infrastructure, and we will see you next time.